Imagine this. A single event in 2026 sends this massive shockwave tearing through the global economy. It starts a chain reaction that touches every business, every single home. And this wasn't just a blip on the radar, not some temporary crisis. It was a fundamental change in the way our world operates. So in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and break down exactly how it all went down and what it really means for us.
But first, let's make this real. Let's bring it right down to you. What do you do when the cost of basically everything, gas for your car, the power bill, your weekly groceries, what do you do when it all spikes at the same time? How do you react? How do you adapt? Because that's the core question we're really digging into here.
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the spark that lit the whole fuse. Then we'll follow that ripple effect, from the big corporations all the way down to our kitchen tables. We'll look at the lasting changes it forced on all of us, and then we'll wrap up with the biggest shift of all, a whole new way of thinking for a much more uncertain world. So let's set the stage. The year is 2026. The world is already, kind of on edge. Tensions are high pretty much everywhere. And then one event just tips the scales and kicks off a full-blown global economic crisis. So you've got these tensions that have been simmering for months, and then, bam, mid-2026, it all boils over with the Iran war. And the fallout was immediate and severe. We are talking about a brutal, shocking spike in oil and gas prices around the world. Suddenly, the very lifeblood of our economy got incredibly expensive, practically overnight. Economists have a specific term for something like this. They call it a negative supply shock. And the key thing to get here is that this wasn't about a sudden jump in demand. It wasn't like everyone suddenly decided to buy more stuff. No, this was an outside event that simply made it more expensive to produce everything. And that gives you the worst possible combination: higher prices for fewer goods. So who felt that first jolt? Where did the first domino fall? Well, it was the businesses, the producers, the companies that make all the things we rely on every single day. The logic here is pretty inescapable. First, energy costs just go through the roof. And since energy is a key ingredient in making almost anything, the cost to produce every single item goes up. When it costs more to make things, businesses just can't afford to make as much as they used to. The entire supply of goods in the economy effectively shrinks. But here's where the squeeze really tightens. Most companies couldn't just turn around and pass all those new costs directly on to us, the consumers. In competitive markets, they had to eat a lot of that cost themselves, and that absolutely crushed their profits. Really, only the biggest players, the ones with a ton of market power, could raise their prices without losing all their customers. For so many other firms, especially smaller ones, the result was just devastating. We're talking crippling losses, and for some, it meant shutting down for good. And that economic shockwave, it didn't stop at the factory gates. It rolled right on through the economy and came knocking on the front door of every single household. The effect on people's wallets was simple, and it was brutal. With your bills for electricity, heat, and gas for the car going through the roof, the money you had left for everything else just disappeared. Your disposable income was slashed. It felt like getting a pay cut, even if the number on your paycheck stayed the same. Let's just take a quick look at a typical household budget before all this happened. See that little slice for energy? Just 5%, totally manageable. And that left this big, healthy 40% chunk for everything else. Leisure, savings, maybe putting some away for a vacation. This is a picture of relative financial stability. And then, this is the aftermath. It's wild. The big fixed costs like housing, they don't change. But look at energy. It triples, jumping from 5% all the way to 15%. So where does that extra money come from? It has to come from somewhere. And you can see it right there. It gets carved directly out of leisure and savings, which plummets from 40% down to 30%. That is a massive hit to a family's quality of life and their financial security. So how did we all react? Well, exactly how you'd think. We started switching to the cheaper store brand stuff. We cut way, way back on the non-essentials, things like eating out, vacations, buying new gadgets. And everybody suddenly became hyper aware of prices, comparing costs on absolutely everything. And this is a key point. This wasn't just a temporary belt tightening. The fact that the crisis dragged on and on, it forced a permanent structural change in strategy for both businesses and for all of us. This quote just nails it perfectly. This wasn't about making a few small tweaks here and there anymore. For companies, this was about straight-up survival. They had to fundamentally rethink their entire way of doing business. I mean, just look at the difference in the business playbook. Before 2026, the whole game was about maximizing efficiency and short-term profit. It was all about those lean, just-in-time global supply chains. But after the shock, the new playbook was all about one word: resilience. The focus shifted from squeezing out immediate profit to managing long-term risk. Survival suddenly became way more important than a good quarterly earnings report. And for us, the consumers, it was the exact same story. Those new habits we formed out of necessity, the brand switching, the cutting back, they stuck. They became permanent fixtures in how we shop and spend. The very structure of consumer demand had been transformed for good.
Which brings us to our final point, and honestly, it's the most profound change of all. The biggest legacy of the 2026 energy shock wasn't higher prices. It was a fundamental shift in our mindset. We were all thrust into an age of uncertainty. First, you saw this huge rise in what's called precautionary savings. People were just scared of the next shock. So anyone who could afford to started saving more and spending less, holding onto cash just in case. Now, for any one person, that's a completely rational thing to do. But when millions of people all do it at the same time, it actually puts a damper on the entire economy. And at the very same time, businesses slammed the brakes on making big investments. I mean, think about it. Why would you build a new factory or launch a new product when you have no idea what your energy costs will be next year? So they just adopted this wait-and-see strategy, and big, bold projects just got put on hold indefinitely. And this, right here, is the most fundamental shift. The very basis of how we make decisions, it changed. It stopped being about today's prices. Now, every major decision, whether you're buying a car or a company is hiring a new employee, it's all dominated by these volatile expectations of what the future might bring. This new reality means our old economic models just aren't good enough anymore. To really understand the world we live in now, we need to bring in newer frameworks. We need the microeconomics of uncertainty to model risk, the theory of expectations to understand how our beliefs shape our actions, and behavioral economics to see how our own psychology drives our financial choices. These are the tools for a world that is now structurally unstable. Which leaves us with one final and pretty critical question. The shock of 2026 was a brutal lesson in how fragile our systems were. It forced us to adapt. But looking forward, you have to ask, are the economic rules and the models we still rely on truly ready for this new, unstable world? Or are we just waiting for the next shock to find out?